Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, although this is a tech show, I'm passionate about sharing human stories, and today I want to dedicate a show to all the startup founders out there, wherever you're listening in the world. And today's guest is Venky B, and he's going to share the story behind Plivo, which is a business communications provider that is serving thousands of innovative businesses in more than 190 countries. And we're talking some big names here, such as IBM, PagerDuty, Decker's, Brand, and all the way through to SMS and Voice APIs. But he is going to share some interesting lessons that he's learned along the way. And if you're a startup founder, there is some priceless information in here. He is usually based in Austin, but today I'm going to have to ask you to buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to India, where Venky is waiting to speak with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Neil. My name is Venky, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Plivo. Plivo is a communications platform that enables businesses to engage with their customers over voice calls and messaging channels in over 190 countries. We serve businesses like IBM, PagerDuty, Decker's, who all use our APIs to embed that into their applications. And obviously with COVID now, we've seen a lot of different use cases. But just last year alone, we powered over 4 billion interactions on our platform globally.
You're serving so many huge household names there, huge companies in over 190 countries. But for people that are tuning in and hearing about Plivo for the first time, can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving for these customers with your technology?
Yeah, so we like to think of these problems as use cases that customers have. And then we come to help them solve that, right? So let me take you through, a few of our use cases, especially the ones which are very relevant in the COVID era or we expect to see post-COVID as well. So one of them being, most mobile apps today use phone number as your identity. And I think we've seen that over the last few years where we've moved on from, at least on the mobile apps, moved on from usernames and passwords to like phone number being your identity, right? So, which pretty much means most of these mobile apps have to verify your phone number. And we call that use case phone verification, right? So you put in your phone number, they verify you either via SMS or a phone call. And then you have an OTP to verify with, and that's your phone verification use case. A similar offshoot of that would be two-factor authentication, where, you're in a web application, and whether it's a banking app or today, I think most modern web applications, by virtue of security, sort of verify your phone number in terms of, sending you a text message or a phone call or other verification channels. So that's an offshoot of that use case, which is two-factor authentication. One of our, pretty popular ones last year, and I think it'll continue to grow even after the COVID era, has been delivery notifications with all of these delivery marketplace or delivery apps notifying their end users of shipping notifications or last mile notifications. That's a pretty popular use case from last year. Even the e-commerce companies notifying their customers of packages and so on. Another interesting use case would be text marketing, right? Where a lot of these brands engage with their customers on text channel with respect to loyalty marketing in various life cycle. Like once you sign up, especially e-commerce, once you sign up and then you start to engage these or start to use these apps, they engage you over these text marketing channel to work you through their life cycle, giving you discounts and loyalty programs and so on and so forth. So yeah, broadly, I would say these are the high level use cases, whether it be phone verification, two-factor authentication, delivery notifications, text marketing. Another one is like usually account alerts related to your accounts. So reminding their users of a different channel, whether it be a web account alert or like I said, e-commerce before, or even, various different alerts around server notifications and so on. So those are broadly some of the problem areas or use cases, as we'd like to call it, is where we help our customers solve for and enable value for them.
One of the things that I've learned after over 1,600 interviews on this podcast is that every company, founder or leader, all have an incredibly unique origin story. And when I looked you guys up before you came on the podcast today, I read that the company's founders all met over GitHub and the team signed its first paying customers before they had a commercial offering. Can I ask that you share the story behind the company?
Yeah, it's an interesting story we have, and it's a pretty unique one. Now, obviously, GitHub is pretty mainstream, but back in the day, this was in 2011. I don't know how many of us would have heard of GitHub back then, but yeah, my co-founder and I both met over GitHub. He was actually in France, and I was in the States, and we're pretty unique story where we come from a developer background, but also our past lives, we worked as telco engineers, right? So here we were, coming from corporate life, and both of us were, sort of out of our mainstream past life experiences and wanting to do our own thing. And we were pretty much, I think, just writing code and, browsing GitHub like back in the day. It was more, I think GitHub was more back in the day, more like a social network now versus now I think it's become more mainstream for just developers to put their code. So we were just doing that, and we just happened to look at each other's profiles and what we were doing. And interestingly, it was something pretty similar. And I'll just touch into why that was interesting and weird back when we think about it. Web development is harder now, but in 2011, we saw all the venture capital funding and all of the investments going into the web and mobile development space, while coming from our past life from telco and communications, we also obviously understood why that was critical. So our thought process was while telecom is great, it was a preview to the few. And how do we make it more interesting and exciting by bringing it to the space where there was all of this, money being thrown in by the venture capitalists and all the funding in that space, right? So our thought process was, if we just married these two different areas, we would pretty much, take a critical problem of communications and put it to the hands of where all the innovation was which was pretty much, web developers and mobile developers. So that was the thought process. And we basically, took that skill set, which we had from our past lives, brought it to, all of these programming languages, and we married both of those. And that's how, Plivo was born. In fact, like you just said, Plivo was actually a hobby project back in the day in 2011, actually an open source hobby project. In 2011, early April 2011. And, we just ended up building a community around it for the first 2-3 months. And we were speaking at this open source conference in Chicago in 2011, where we got our first customers who came to us and said, look, if you just built there's a specific use case, like I was talking about before, for us using your framework, we would pay you. And we were like, yeah, sure. And that's how we got started back in the day.
And we will have a lot of startup founders listening around the world. So on the topic of debt funding, can I ask that you tell me how that was a no-brainer for Plivo and why other companies should possibly consider that route too, as there is no dilution and it can help with short-term investments? Because I think that was the route that you guys originally took, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are, just for context in terms of how we grew the company, we were part of, Y Combinator. We did take some seed capital from, we thought were strategic investors who would help us and mentor us early on. But, over the years, primarily our DNA has been all about profitability. We've been profitable as a company since 2015, end of 2015, early 2016. So almost 5-6 years now in terms of how we have run that, right? And, there are various different ways you can raise capital. One is the obvious, venture capital. Then you have the debt capital route, which is another alternative, but not talked so much for most companies out there. And then there are others. I don't want to get into too many of the details with respect to all the other options. But essentially, coming back to debt funding, I don't know if it's for everyone, but it definitely worked for us because, like I said, because of our DNA, because over the years, we've run our business very profitably. Our business fundamentals are solid and unit economics are pretty profitable. So our bankers, where we bank with, gave us this option, which was a no-brainer for us to pick up, which was, the debt funding route. Pretty low from an interest perspective, non-dilutive. You don't like equity is what we value in the company over the years because we haven't raised too much capital, right? And it's for the long haul, so you don't have to dilute at all. And then we could use that in sort of adding value to the company over the long run. And what the advantage of a debt capital was, like, essentially it helped us with sort of a cushion in terms of investing in various different areas, right? Those areas were like fast tracking a hire, like a senior hire, right? Like you want to get that extra VP on board, or you want to invest in some experiments internally, whether it's be product or growth or new areas of investment and so on. So that's what we did, and if that's the way you think about as a company or a founder, debt is for you. If not, there's obviously venture capital. So both of them have their pros and cons, but it definitely worked for us. And I think more companies should explore debt capital, especially if they're on the route of profitability.
And also for the startup founders listening, you guided the company to actually try and hold out from taking money and being trapped. And that is a route less taken by founders. So can you expand on the benefits that you've seen from adopting that strategy over the years?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think the primary perspective is, like I said, we were part of Y Combinator early on in 2012. And essentially, a couple of things which settled in early with us were, Paul Graham, who started Y Combinator, always, spoke about this, which was you're either as a company default alive or default dead. There are only two states, right? And what that essentially means is, like, are you burning more money than you're making? Because if that's the case, you got to keep raising more and more capital to be, default alive, or grow fast enough at some point to get to default alive. If you're not default alive, you're default dead, right? So essentially, this came in very early, and that sort of helped us align a lot of this objective around this. It's sort of like, you owning your own destiny, right? And Paul Graham has written an essay about this. You can check this online, Default Alive, Default Dead, Paul Graham. You'd find that essay. It's pretty popular. And the whole thought process is this, right? If the company is default alive, then as a company, one can plan ambitious new things, ambitious new projects, hire more folks on board and all of that without having to rely on external mechanisms like fundraising or capital. I think fundraising is a great lever for a lot of companies. But if you don't want to rely on that, being default alive gets you to do all of this, right? If you're default dead, then it's all about, like, how do we get off of that trajectory and you either reduce burn or reduce spending and all of that. And I think this wasn't too fashionable or talked about pre-COVID, but start of 2020, we all saw what happened in the market, and those are the times when such sort of thinking just shines, because when every other company was pretty much downsizing or laying off teams, we actually hired a lot of our team members during that time and expanded because you could just find the best talent out there. So those are some advantages of focusing on default alive sort of a mindset versus always being this fundraising mode.
And if we do have anyone listening at the beginning or an early stage of their startup career, is there any advice that you would offer to founders, especially around things like recruitment in the early days of a company?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you want to be responsible in terms of early days, right? Because you have too many things to do as a founder in your early days when you're just getting started. So obviously, the most important thing is to figure in terms of how do you hire people who align well with you in terms of the entire team structure. So one of them is focusing actively on building out that initial team pool, right? Call it a foundational team, because pretty much they're going to be an extension of what you want to get done. And it's important that you start to build on top of that. So in the initial days, what typically works is looking for generalists who can put on multiple different hats and get a lot of things done in a specific area works really well. So you usually hire for ability and culture fit, then experience. And those are the folks who are also would be willing to take a bet on you as a company in the early days, especially for first time founders who are unproven, wanting to get their initial business model figured out, right? So yeah, and then the other thing I think which is critical in the early days is to hire folks who thrive in an unstructured environment, right? Because like pretty much your first couple of years is going to be a lot of unstructured, so getting folks who thrive in such an environment is what you want to optimize for, versus obviously as you scale and evolve as a company, various different other skill sets are required to scale the company. But in the initial days, this is what works for most companies, and this is what worked for us as well.
And just when talking about growth in a startup, I recently read that you guys had said the first step is finding a product market fit with repeatability. Great quote, but can you expand on that and the message you wanted to send out?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, every startup goes through these stages, right? So when you're launching a new product, I mean, a startup is pretty much a new product, assuming it's a product company, right? So usually your first objective is how do I get my first customer? Then it's usually the first 10 customers. And then the first 100 customers. And then that's when you start thinking about like revenue milestones. Usually it's that. And then obviously as the company grows, then you start thinking about how do I get to my first $1 million in annual revenue, then, 1 to 10 million, 10 to 100 million. And then obviously you start being called a unicorn beyond $100 million, right? So those are the usual stages, whether it's, a startup on its own or a product within a startup, in terms of how companies think about it. And why product market fit becomes even more critical is because just like how your customers choose you as a startup to partner with, you also need to choose your customers really well, because it's all about like solving a problem for those customers. And what is the reason a customer chooses you as a partner? Right? Because like, are you adding the right value? Is the value aligned with what you set out to align or to build out? So I think there are a few things you want to think about. And that's where you want to think about, like, is there, and like I said, going back to my Y Combinator days, Paul Graham always used to say, do things that don't scale in the initial days. So in these days, it's all about figuring out, like, whatever we intended to do, are we doing it for the right persona, or right set of people? And is it adding the right value? And doing it with, like I said, the first customer, first 10, first 100. And once you do that, you obviously start to, I mean, this can all be captured and measured with data, but you start to see patterns emerge in terms of, am I solving a problem which is repeatable in nature here? Because the last thing you want to do as a startup is have 100 different customers and you're solving for their problems in 100 different ways, right? Because that can get pretty chaotic. So that's what I meant by product market fit. And once that starts to happen, you figure out what the repeatable pattern is. Obviously, a lot of this happens by talking to customers and seeing where you add value. And then you just, repeat more of that. Repeat could just mean getting more customers like that, which obviously is putting more investment in terms of, getting the word out. Or a lot of times what happens is customers get the word out. That's what happened with us. Like, we didn't have marketing for a long while, right? And in our initial days, our first 10 customers got us our first 100 customers, and so on and so forth. So a lot of times that's just repeatable. In other business models, you just got to spend, the time and energy in marketing and sales and investing in that once you have that product market fit. Because investing in growth too early without the product market fit usually leads you down the wrong path, and you don't know what you're solving for or what value you add to the customer.
And like you said at the very beginning of the episode, you now serve over 190 different countries. So on the topic of scaling and moving towards global expansion, are there any tips that you can offer founders there too?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, now I think post-COVID, everybody's thinking global. Yeah. There are two different areas you want to think global in terms of, right? One obviously is customers. Like how do you have customers globally? And then the second, the team, right? Like most companies now, at least, like I said, post-COVID, are thinking about global teams. It was a pretty unique phenomenon for us. Or we were a very unique company in those days, 2011, 12, where we had 2 offices globally. But now it's becoming a very normal phenomenon because there's so much talent available everywhere. So why not leverage it, right? So the usual structure to go about this is, similar with both customers and team members, which is get one location right first. Starting with customers, like pick one geo, right? Whether it's Americas or Europe or Asia, whatever works for your product fit in terms of wherever you can solve that value add in terms of the product fit. Solve for that one geo because the problems are usually pretty unique. And once you figure that out and you've product market fit going and starting to repeat that, then you go look at the next geo, right? Obviously this sounds easier than done, but you usually don't want to spread too thin in terms of like going complete geos, because like I said, a lot of these problems are unique to specific geos. With us, obviously, we are solving for business communications, and most businesses wanted to sort of engage and interact with their customers globally. So for us, like we had to sort of plan this out day one in terms of how do we focus on specific companies and businesses in one geo, which for us was Americas. And then over time, then we started expanding globally in terms of various different geos, right? And today we do 190 countries. And then, like I said, from a talent pool perspective, today, you pretty much want to think, how do you leverage global talent pool versus just being one geo?
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing so much invaluable advice. I think what makes it so valuable is it's coming straight from the heart, and you've lived and breathed this world for so long. But looking to the future, what's next for Plivo? Is there anything that excites you about the road ahead or anything you can share?
Sure. Yeah. Our next phase is pretty interesting. If you look at our mission is to simplify business communications. And in our first phase of the past 10 years, we've been working on our mission for technical audiences. And what I mean by that is like, engineering teams, developers, product managers, and so on. Now that, we're at the cusp of our 10th year, our next phase, the way we look at it is like, how do we essentially stick true to our mission, which is simplifying business communication, but start expanding our audiences to being non-technical, like customer service and sales, and how do we simplify business communications for them? So we have a few exciting things planned and upcoming in our roadmap, which we will talk about when we're ready to release. But that's essentially our next phase, and that's coming pretty soon. Because we're completing our 10 years this September.
Well, you've had a fantastic journey. And a question I always like to ask founders on the podcast is if there is a particular song or piece of music that has accompanied them on that tech career. And is there a particular song that reminds you of that career or just helps you get your head in the zone before going on stage or landing that next big meeting?
Sure. I wouldn't specifically say a career, but definitely, I'm more of an old schooler. John Bon Jovi, It's My Life. Whenever, during our initial days, whenever you're starting out, you have that self-doubt, or you're trying to think about how do I position this, pitch this, get to market. That's one song that would play in my head. Cause it's finally our lives, right? So that's one thing. Like I said, I'm an old schooler, but yeah, John Bon Jovi, It's My Life.
Well, as a fellow old schooler, that is a great track to choose, and I will add that to the playlist. But before I let you go, for anyone that would like to find out more information about your work or everything you're doing at Plivo or how to contact your team, what's the best starting point?
Absolutely. You can find us online at plivo.com. That's plivo.com. And you can contact our sales team or support team by just going to the website and going to our footer section where we have links to contacting both of our teams.
Well, for me, today's interviews had absolutely everything. We've heard your founder story, talked about debt funding, entrepreneurship, recruiting, growth, global expansion, all washed down with a bit of old school Bon Jovi. But it's absolutely fantastic from my side. And thank you so much for taking the time to share all that with me today.
Thanks for your time, Neil.
What a great story there about how the company's founders all met over GitHub and the team signed its first paying customers before they even had a commercial offering. But it's also great to hear about the stories around debt funding and how it was a no-brainer for the Plivo team and how they decided to take the route less taken. And as a result, they were able to find the first step, which is finding a product market fit with repeatability, and then focused on making a few customers really happy and keeping an eye on that churn. And as a result, they're now serving people in 190 different countries and some huge names too. So a great startup story. And no matter where you're located in the world, I'm passionate about getting your story on here too. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So I hoped you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. And if you did, I invite you to join me again tomorrow where we'll do it all again. I'm going to turn the volume up to 11 and go rock out to It's My Life. But a huge thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.